I would like to welcome you to our Defunded Schools program. I'm so glad you could come and join us. We wanted the best to talk to you and tell you what's happening with it, and we do have the best here. Our next guest is Robert Peterson. He's the president of Milwaukee Teachers Association. So we'll give him a welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've been a fifth grade teacher for most of my life. For 30 years, I've been surrounded by 10 and 11-year-olds. My wife says that has permanently distorted my sense of humor. 4 years ago, though, I was elected president of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, and so I was released to work full-time, so now I'm surrounded by adults. I actually prefer 10 and 11-year-olds. You can excuse, they sort of, act the same, but you can excuse 10 and 11-year-olds because they're 10 and 11. We're still looking for some excuses for adults. The information that's been provided thus far, there's not much to add in terms of some of the cuts, so I'll mention a few, but I'll try to put it in a broader perspective, and that is that it's really not just this cut and that cut about public education or this cut and that cut about the university. It's really a war. It's a war against what I call the public sector or the common good. It's a war against this notion that we as a community should take care of the entire community, especially those who are the least advantaged. And it's a war that's been financed and thought through by very wealthy and conservative think tanks and individuals who really don't want there to be a public sector. And so if you think about the budget, basically if it's public, Walker and what I call the 1% want to defund it, show that it's not working too well, and then turn it over to private operators. Think about it. It's about public university, public schools, public radio, public TV, public transportation, public health services. You could, and in fact, think about the public natural resources, the attacks on the DNR and the Nelson, Knowles Nelson, the Republican and the Democrat steward program. We're talking about an attack on the things that keep us together as a community. And one of the basics part of that is a public education system. The public education system in each community is really the only institution that has the capacity, commitment, and legal obligation to serve all children. Does it mean that they do it well or the best they could? No. In fact, the history of the United States education is really problematic. For a while, people of color, obviously, in the old day, in terms of, it was illegal for black people to learn how to read and write. Women weren't allowed, girls weren't allowed to go into certain colleges or schools. It's been a long struggle to bring democracy to our democratic nation, right? And that's what I tell, I'm very proud to be an American. I'm proud to be part of this country. But what I'm most proud of is how over the years and years and years, people have worked to make sure that we are more democratic. We are more inclusive. We are more caring about everybody. And what's happening is a real move backwards. And so it's a really big picture. The person behind this notion of vouchers, a guy by the name of Milton Friedman out of Chicago, University of Chicago. And his goal he wrote about in the 50s was to get rid of public education. He writes about that. And the Bradley Foundation, which is here in Milwaukee, is a very conservative foundation which has put hundreds of millions of dollars into that goal. Now, one of the reasons they've been successful, to some extent, is the fact that there are problems in public education. And the question really before us is, okay, there are problems. It's actually problems in most institutions in society. health, we won't even go through there. We don't want to be too depressed. But the question is, should we work together as a community to try to fix those problems? Or should we abandon those public institutions, that commitment to the common good, and say everybody for themselves? Well, the problem with the marketplace, there's certainly some advantages to the marketplace, but there's an unregulated marketplace means that those people who have the money, who have the sort of privilege or position or education or the connections can benefit much more than those people who don't. And that's one of the reasons I think we see this growing chasm between rich and poor in our country. My wife, who is a journalist and a photographer, talks about Walker wanting to run for president. And she says, well, he'll be the divider-in-chief. Not the commander-in-chief, but the divider-in-chief. Because he really has divided people. For instance, my wife went to a religious school, her whole education. We support, people's right to go to a religious school. I would, and people can teach whatever religion they want, and that's fine. When it comes to public monies going to religious school, that's a different thing. Because those schools have no accountability to the public. And they are private schools. They aren't under the open meetings, open records laws. We don't know when the kids are getting expelled or discriminated against. There's no due process for those kids or for the staff or for the parents in those schools. And I'm not saying that they're all bad or all good. Some are very good, I'm sure. But do we, as a public policy, want to support the privatization of this basic institution? And I don't think we do. It's not in our interest. And so we have to really think hard as we talk about this budget and see. And I'll give you one example. It's sort of ironic. The one program that was, what's called school choice. They say this, they call voucher programs a charter school choice. And I say, well, it's a choice for the few, but it's really hurting the real choice for the many, those 800,000 students that were looked at, mentioned in that bar graph. The one school choice program that started in the 70s was called Chapter 220. This is a program I taught at Fratney Street School in Milwaukee, and it's a Spanish-English school, and we had kids coming in from Whitefish Bay, where Alberta Darling is from. I pointed that out to her when I testified, from Mequon, and they benefited from coming to our school, learning two languages, and being in a very mixed, racially mixed setting. Similarly, actually the program was more focused on allowing African Americans and other people of color to go to the suburbs, because historically there's been the discrimination in terms of housing and all sorts of things that have kept us, we're the worst, most segregated metropolitan area in the nation. What is Governor Walker proposing in his budget? To get rid of Chapter 220. And it's a height of hypocrisy, because he talked about choice for everybody. Well, not that, not the one choice program that actually had as a purpose the reduction of segregation and racial isolation. No, he supports the programs that actually have this, quite frankly, the purpose of destroying public education. And so it really, to me, exposes the hypocrisy, and it really raises questions about the motivation of people. Now, I'll say this though. So I came into office in 2011, 4 years ago, right at the height of Act 10. And people didn't know whether or not to congratulate me or give me condolences when I became president. But what I found in the 4 years is the amazing tenacity of the teachers, willing to put up with just amazing, incredible difficulties, cutbacks, large class sizes, everybody fearful of what's going to go on, and yet, as was said by the first couple of speakers, just this commitment to the kids, working late at night, bringing in shoes and whatever the kids need, and not only that, but advocating, people standing up and saying, no, this is not right. And you really have to wonder, who is really behind these draconian cuts? I mean, is there really a groundswell to cut the IRIS program, right? That's what it's called. Yeah. Is there groundswell to stop the stewardship program? or to say that we should eliminate 60 scientists and educators from the DNR. Nobody's demanding. I mean, it's not like, you know, as one person said, you know, the problem with the Republican Party isn't that it's the Republican Party, it's not the Republican Party of our parents. You know, I mean, I'm happy to have a good conversation with the conservative. I've gotten more conservative in a lot of ways as I've grown older. But some people would contest that probably, but seriously, you know, let's have a conversation about these things. Let's not just jam it down our throat. So my message is this, in terms of the feeling of positive things, is that there's going to have to be a rebirth of a real movement, a social movement, to get back what's been taken away. And that movement has to be amongst people who are older like ourselves, younger like ourselves, people who are concerned about the environment, people who are concerned about low-wage workers. I mean, people sometimes ask me, Bob, what's one reform in the Milwaukee Public Schools that would really help the kids the most? I said, family-sustaining jobs for all their parents and caregivers. You know, because I've been, as a teacher for so many years, I've taken kids home after school, they miss their bus, and nobody's home. Where's your mom? Well, she's working. She works to 10 o'clock. You know, and so the 14-year-old is taking care of the 10-year-old, and who knows, you know. And that's not the fault of the mother. I mean, she's working hard, and it's just the way there's not enough support, or the wages aren't enough to hire a babysitter or whatever. So what I see happening amongst young people, there's this whole movement of Raise Up 15 to try to get living wages for fast food workers. And it's had some effect. Some big companies are announcing, oh, we're going to raise our wages. They're a little worried, I think. We see a movement, the Black Lives Matter, which is saying, no, we have to treat everybody with respect. We see high school students getting more involved. And so in terms of and my optimism comes from the fact that despite all these bad things, there are people still willing to come out and to say, no, this is not just. We don't want to leave our communities, our state, to our children and grandchildren in this condition. You know, I have to say, what happened to Wisconsin? We just can't allow that. So I encourage you all to speak out, contact your legislators, contact your friends who live in these places where there are more conservative legislators, and say, no, we want a Wisconsin that looks out for everybody. We want a Wisconsin that believes that in the common good for all. So thank you very much.